All right.
Yeah, so Andrew, I will let you take over. We've got a few people here, so welcome Andrew Conklin, our newest mentor here with Mastrius, who's starting a group, and he wants to share a little bit about who he is. And the floor is yours, Andrew.
All right, thank you. Thanks. So welcome everyone, and as Leslie said, I'm really looking forward to starting on May the 4th, which is the Star Wars anniversary day. I don't know if there's a real strong connection there, but maybe you can draw it if you see it. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in here. And I want to walk you through my story a little bit and some of my ideas and some of my work. And then, as I mentioned, we'll do a little bit of a demo here. So you guys can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, so here we go. All right, so I wanted to start with a couple of epigrams. It's always hard to sum up, and there's so many great things said about art. But this is an interesting one, I think, because it sort of sums up some of my ideas about why I wanted to paint. Was from Winston Churchill. He talks about artists have the power to command the moment to remain, not only for their own advantage and reputation, but for the pleasure of everyone else. And this is something that Churchill had mentioned a few times. He loved the idea of holding something for other people to see, holding something that was extremely, pleasant, extremely, important, and having that as something that everyone could see and not losing it, basically. And that's been a driving force in my work. When I paint someone, I'm painting them in that time, and I'm trying to preserve something of them for as long as that painting will exist. This is from Paula Modersohn-Becker, a quote from, a quote from Paula Modersohn-Becker. She's a modernist German painter who actually was really influenced by the French post-impressionist period. She had a fairly short life. She held off having a baby until she thought she was ready, and then she actually died briefly or shortly after her baby was born. She had an embolism and died tragically young. But she's a terrific artist. If you don't know who she is, I would definitely recommend looking her up. She's excellent. But this is something she said: the intensity with which a subject is grasped, that is what makes for beauty in art. And I think that comes down to the point of what is it that you want to paint and why do you want to paint it? You really have to have something that's going to grab you, something that's going to really speak to you, and something you want to communicate to others. So in a nutshell, the artist's journey can be thought of as something like this. You start with inspiration because you don't know how to do anything yet, but you're inspired. Then you move on to integration, where you're bringing in these strands of influence from your instructors, from things you see, from your friends, your colleagues, and so on. And then that all gets worked out in innovation, hopefully, when you get to the point where you're actually able to create something original and new. And of course, that's the ultimate goal for artists, or maybe it's not the goal for every artist. I can think of, for example, there are certain kinds of traditional kind of cultural settings. For example, Greek icon painters often paint in a certain style that's passed down from generation to generation. The idea is to follow those stylistic things as closely as possible. But in general, when we look at art, we look as a way to express and to innovate. And those innovations can be technical, stylistic, cultural, or thematic, and all of those. All right, so I wanted to look at several themes. I want to break this down in terms of my learning to see, inspiration, some things about tech and technology. Inside, outside are some images of interiors and landscape studies, and then talk about color and a demo. All right, so I wanted to start off with the early work, inspiration, things that got me started. This is me back in the day. So one thing that has had, I would say in retrospect, had something of influence on me was my name. I come from a family of 6 kids, and all the kids have biblical names. Well, almost all of us have biblical first names, and mine being Andrew just made me wonder. I always wondered about that name and why I had that name. And when I think about growing up in the 60s and 70s, like the 2 most famous artists that I was aware of were Andy Warhol and Andrew Wyeth. And so this left an impression on me in some way, that I was just aware of these famous artists and they had shared my name. And I thought, maybe there's some kind of connection in some way. As a little kid, you just think about that. You just see that those parallels, and it makes you wonder, right? There's that, that phrase, the nomen est omen, the Roman phrase about name is destiny. It's not exactly like that, but anyway, it always was something in my mind.
I like that reference.
Thank you. These are a couple of 5-year-old self-portraits. I have a book at home that my mom bound together with string, and it has a lot of these drawings, just drawings of myself over and over. And I didn't really do a lot of that after this, for whatever reason. I did a series of things all at the same time, and it looks like I'm happy in one of them, and I don't know why I'm crying in the other one. I have no idea what's going on there, but anyway, different kinds of self-portraits. And then jumping ahead to 21 years old, this is a self-portrait I did when I was studying at the National Academy of Design in New York City, which is a really terrific art school. It's still a museum, but it no longer has a school, unfortunately. The school closed probably about 10 years ago, but the school had been the longest running school in America. It was started by Samuel Morse, the guy that invented the Morse code. I don't know if you know, he was actually a painter. That was his full-time job. And the Morse code was like a side thing that he did, I guess he was interested in codes and things like that. So, but he was a fairly successful portrait painter, and he's one of the founders of the school. So I went there from Chicago, as I mentioned, and I moved out there when I was 21 with a friend, and we went to art school there. And so this is, I was, way behind, I felt, everyone else in New York. When my friend and I got there, we were 2 guys from Chicago, and all the students in the school most of them were from the New York area. And a lot of them had studied with these illustrious teachers. And so it was a real quick catching up that we thought we had to do. This is a self-portrait done around the same time. So this has been 21 years old. And you can see that I'm really interested in the ideas that you see in the New York kind of school of painting. The way that I was taught in New York was a very modernist, kind of a postmodernist style, I guess you could say. There was a lot of kind of building off of the abstract expressionist. You sort of work out the painting on the canvas. There wasn't a lot of planning. You sort of started and you kind of let the painting tell you what to do. So it was a really very free form and very exciting way to work. You made a lot of mistakes, you made a lot of errors, but you had a lot of unresolved paintings, like this never really got finished, this painting, but it was a really interesting way to do it because your focus was so much on the paint, on the material, and responding to the colors that you were seeing. So that made it a really interesting, exciting way to work. So I really, really learned a lot from that. Here's another example. This is a kind of fairly early painting from that first year in New York. Working under Skylight Studios was also extremely helpful. There's another one here. So this is probably about a year later. So I'm getting a little bit more sure of what I'm doing. And then like I said, I want to talk about some of these inspirations, the technical, stylistic, cultural, and thematic. So the things in blue I'm going to highlight, the text in blue, are specific things that influenced me in one of these 4 categories that I then incorporated into my work. So just when I was finished with art school, I worked part-time in New York, and then I also took a few other classes. Once I finished the National Academy, I was at the Art Students League, and then I took some independent study classes with some other great painters. And around that time, I got interested in painting a painting of the Fulton Street subway station, which is a large old subway station in Lower Manhattan. Beautiful building, and it has a Fulton steamboat there. It has these beautiful ceramic tiles, goes back to the original subway. So I wanted to make it like an altarpiece. I was looking at a lot of Italian altarpieces, kind of Gothic style altarpieces. And so that was my idea, was to build the altarpiece format in a subway kind of setting. So this is the painting. It took a couple of years, about a year maybe. It straddled 2 years. And it's 6 by 10 feet. It's a huge painting. It's the biggest thing I've done on a stretched canvas. And then I hired the models, and so I was living at that point. I had moved to the suburbs of New York with my wife. I just got married around that time. So the painting itself are different people that we knew from the suburb that we were in, and people we met in the city. So now what's going on in the painting is there's a few different themes here. So there's the 3 ages kind of theme. So there are 3
Okay.
figures. And so the young girl, she's looking forward. So she's looking to the right, looking at her future. The woman in the middle is kind of at her height of maturity. So she has the basket of fruit showing her fertility, that kind of thing. And then finally the older woman looking back, holding some flowers, looking back at the past. So there's this idea of kind of the three stages of life.
Oh, fascinating.
And then I also built in this 5 figures. There's 5 senses. So each one of the persons represents one of the 5 senses. You see this a lot in, in Dutch painting, Baroque painting in general. You see quite a bit of 5 objects or 5 people, often representing the 5 senses. So, so you have the girl on the left. She represents sight because she's looking. The boy is tying his shoe. The boy with the skateboard is tying his shoe. So he's touch. The girl in the middle is taste with the fruit. The man musician is sound, and the old woman with the flowers is smell.
That's fascinating.
Thank you. Thanks. And around this time, I went to Rome, both in 1990 and 1991. So 2 trips sort of back to back. First time I'd really been to Europe, and spent a lot of time looking at all the great works in Rome, and also Florence. We also were in Florence. We were in Venice shortly, and so on. But the works of Caravaggio really had an effect on me. I really wasn't interested in Caravaggio's work as an art student. I'd seen it in books, but it didn't really speak to me. I thought it was kind of overwrought. But seeing the Caravaggios in person was a really different experience. So here you can see on the right, that's a photograph of me from like last year visiting again and photographing this painting. So this early painting particularly was interesting to me because it wasn't so big. And it was a early painting, and it was more colorful than most Caravaggios. And I thought, when I got back to New York, I was like, I want to paint a painting exactly the same scale as that painting to see what it was like, to try to get the feeling of what it must have felt like to paint that. So painting on it. The canvas, so I stretched the canvas, it's approximately the same size, a little bit longer. It's 4 feet by 6 feet. And then I did some sketching. You can see on the left, there's some sketches, and then even placement of where I was sitting relative to the model, so I could reproduce and set it up again. And that's the painting there. So it has the kind of elements that I wanted to bring in. The figure in the center in the Caravaggio is an angel, an androgynous figure, and then you have a masculine figure, a feminine figure with Mary and Joseph. And so here I have the left side is kind of the feminine side of the painting, and the right side, so the masculine side of the painting. I have Cupid. I have a boy that's the same skateboard kid in green. The girl on the left is the same girl as holding the fruit in the other painting with the same shirt on. And then the girl in the middle is a local college student at the school that there was a college, Sarah Lawrence College, where we're really close to where we're living. And so she posed, and so she's a girl, but she's wearing boys' clothes, so she's kind of an androgynous figure, like the angel. And there's a detail of the girl.
That's beautiful.
And so the sheet music in the painting is actual music, like she's holding up sheet music. You can actually play.
Oh, you could actually play that from
really? Yeah, it's actual music. And the people that bought it put it in a music room in their house above a piano. So you could literally, like, the painting literally has a soundtrack sort of built in.
Oh, that's fascinating. I think that's amazing what you build into your paintings. Yeah. And
so another inspiration would be design elements, like abstract elements that you learned, say, in design school. And my undergrad's actually in graphic design, but I didn't really, use it professionally as much as I did painting, because I shifted to painting pretty early on. But I have worked, in graphic design for different times, and taught it, of course. But I like the idea of this diagonal. So you saw in that Fulton Street painting, everything is very vertical, everything's very calm. There's a grid pattern, it's very calm. But when I saw the paintings in Rome, the Baroque paintings, the kind of movement that you see in these paintings, the dynamism, I wanted to bring in some more of these dynamic elements. So the diagonal is a really good way to bring in dynamism into your painting, because it's an unstable transitional angle, right? So if the horizontal is very calm, a vertical is kind of straight, but the diagonal is in motion. So I started to kind of build that into my painting. So I started doing a series of paintings of artists and models, because again, when I got out of art school, I was looking for a subject, and I thought, well, just like writers kind of write what they know, painters can paint what they know. So I knew, what it's like to be an artist in a model kind of setting. So I started doing a series of paintings with artists and models as a kind of subject. But of course, that's just the surface subject, the meaning, goes beyond that. You look at kind of Adam and Eve, that sort of idea of the figure. And so here I use the diagonal shape to kind of add the structure, a kind of pyramid structure to the composition.
Mhm.
And then
I love
again,
your lighting. It's
thank you.
it's
Yeah,
inspiring.
yeah, these are done mostly from life and mostly with, studios with natural light, with north light or east light. We when we moved around the city, everywhere we've lived, pretty much we've looked for either east light or north light. The current place we have is has north facing windows, and so
Oh, okay.
I really like to use natural light whenever I can. Yeah.
Oh,
Here's another example. This Ang study. This is for a big painting in the Louvre. And the French artist did a lot of studies of famous writers and philosophers and so on. And so I love that pose in that sketch. So I built that into the gesture of the artist here.
yeah, I can see that.
Thanks.
And incredible work.
Thanks. And then after a while, this is the fourth version of artist and model. They're all different in terms of design. But again, you see the same pose, the female model with the kind of diagonal movement. And here I kind of used I used a different male model who's kind of he looked like a Modigliani kind of character. He was New Yorker, part gypsy, and he had this real kind of artistic look about him. He was a great model. That was a lot of fun to try to integrate and kind of work them together. And you can see he's sort of staring at his painting in this very pensive way. He's not even focused on the model. He's just focused on his ideas. This is the platonic versus the real,
Yeah, exactly.
So other inspirations were this book in particular. I found it's fascinating. This is that should be David Rubin. Sorry, the autocorrect fixed it. It's Lubin, not Rubin.
Oh geez, yeah.
The autocorrect didn't like what I wrote there. So Rubin's book is fascinating because what he does is looks at a series of 19th century American artists and writers: Henry James, Sargent, Thomas Akins. And he really looks at their work and kind of deconstructs it along, I guess you could say, Freudian lines. So I know I've talked to people who are actual psychologists or psychiatrists, and they've read the book or the passages that I gave them, and they really didn't think it really held up. But as art criticism, it's excellent. So I would strongly recommend getting a look at this book. The chapter on Akins, the American painter Akins, is so fascinating because he shows this element of time within passage of time within a single painting. But the one on this painting by Sargent, The Daughters of Edward Darley Boy, it's a famous American painting in Boston, and it shows these four daughters of an American artist living in Paris. And the painting was done when Sargent was really young. He was in his mid to late 20s. So it's a phenomenal accomplishment. But that figure sitting on the rug, and Rubin talks about each figure and what they stand for. It gets really interesting. But that figure on the rug is kind of, Rubin talks about her kind of imitating a grown woman's act of giving birth. Like she has the doll, the doll's held between her legs, and she's kind of mimicking or miming what it's like to grow up and be a mother. So anyway, I love that idea of this kind of, the giving birth kind of idea. So I built that into this painting here, where you have the same artist and you have the artist resting against the womb of the model. So in other words, she's sort of she's kind of the inspiration. She's a muse, and the muse is sort of giving birth to the artist's idea. So the artist is only a channel through which the idea is brought into the world, right? The artist sort of works between the muse and the world. So that's what I tried to build into this painting.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Thanks. This one, the inspiration for another series of paintings was William Hogarth. He's a British painter from the 18th century, very famous painter and printmaker, did a lot of really interesting political satire in his painting and his drawing prints. Anyway, he wrote a book, which you can find online. It's called The Analysis of Beauty. It's in English, and it's pretty interesting, but he claims, among other things, that beautiful things have to have this S-shaped curve, and he sees Michelangelo uses it, and if you don't use it, you're probably not going to get something beautiful. And you can see the self-portrait here, even with his dog, and you see his palette, and you see that S-shaped curve line. So I started to build that into a series of paintings that I've done. I did some other artist and model paintings, and you could see I tried to line up the arms of the model with the arms of the thing and create like an S-shaped curve. And so you see this S-shaped curve. If you start looking for it, you see it in a lot of artists' work, whether they were aware of Hogarth or not. I think people sort of naturally find it a very interesting line. It tends to have a sense of movement and motion.
Yeah, I've heard about the S shape, but now that there's more, weight behind what that means. That's interesting.
And like I said, analysis of beauty is online. You can find it in HTML versions, and you can take a look at it yourself. So it's definitely out there, and it's pretty, Hogarth is fascinating. Right, so another source of inspiration and the kind of kind of more abstract idea is this the idea of Plato and Aristotle, and the kind of interconnection between this idea of where does truth lie, where is beauty, where is love, where are these things that we have, these major kind of human elements. And there's the painting by Raphael in Rome, this very famous painting here at where you see Plato and Aristotle kind of debating this issue. And so the figure of Plato is the guy with the white beard and the bald hair, and he's pointing up toward the sky, saying that all truth and all love and all things come from what he calls the forms, these ideal forms that exist somewhere. He doesn't really say where, somewhere in heaven, I guess, and that humans try to imitate these forms through our behavior and through what we do. And there's forms for everything, forms for furniture. There's like the ultimate chair. Another one, he says, like, if you have a form for a chair, you can build a chair, but if you destroy the chair, well, the chair is still there because you still have the form. You can always rebuild another one. Whereas Aristotle says that no, Aristotle's hand is to the ground. He's saying, no, everything that we know, all the laws that we've worked out and the ways societies work is all based on just trial and error. And we just do this because we have to work it out among ourselves. There's no ultimate form. We just have to figure it out within the context of our lives. And they're both extremely compelling arguments, right? And so, but they're in tension, right? They're in tension with each other. Then I was also reading the work of Claude Lévi-Strauss. He's a French anthropologist, fascinating guy. But he did anthropology for a while, but then he really got interested in kind of cross-cultural issues. He said that basically every society has a kind of binary code, that light and dark, light versus dark, nature versus culture, the body versus the soul. And so I put that into this painting here. So the painting is called Spanish Still Life, and it was done after a trip to Spain, but it's not really about Spain. The painting shows, let's see if I can see a little bit better there. The painting shows a tabletop, a Spanish tile table, and then you have a chair on a rug on the ground. So what you're looking at is all the things on the table have to do with the five senses. So there's a restaurant napkin, there's an ashtray, there's a violin, there's honeycomb, a glass, fruit, and so on. And then below the table on the chair and on the floor are things to do with the mind, right? So there's glasses, books, sheet music, Islamic prayer rug. And so there's a split in the painting diagonally between the mind and the body, or the body and the mind. And so I try to bring these opposites together in one single image, which is kind of the goal of this, this thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You try to bring opposites together and so on.
Yeah.
Details. And here again, the sheet music is all actual music. I think the one song is Happy Birthday. I can't remember.
Oh, okay. I was just going to ask you what you picked for the song. That's fascinating.
More complicated, yeah.
The layers that you build into this are just fascinating. They're, yeah.
Thanks. All right, so in terms of the process, I use what are called cartoon drawings. So cartoon is like an old fashioned word for a preparatory drawing. Typically you see this in Italian art where things are worked out on large pieces of this rough kind of carton style paper. That's why it's called cartoon. It's like this heavy paper, and it has nothing to do with like comics or anything like that. And the cartoon drawing is where you work out your poses and everything. And I do it on tracing, but I use tracing paper. And then the tracing paper, I can move the tracing paper around to overlap the figures in different ways or move them up and down or something like that. So here you can see I'm working out some different ideas of a grocer's scene where you have a girl buying something and this guy from this fancy grocery store like selling. So kind of buyer seller opposites. And so this is one of the paintings. I've done a series of paintings along this theme as well, where you have the buyer seller, again, opposites kind of together. So in this case, I have a male and a female, I have a Korean model and a French model. And then this idea of opposites. And you see the man is this fancy grocery store. There's this place called Gourmet Garage in New York City. It's like a fancy upscale grocery store. It's had a couple different iterations. So the guy is holding this thing with this super fancy fruit, and the girl is holding really simple things like apples and corn, very unsophisticated to show the innocence versus the experience.
Oh,
There's another version here, it's in 2007. So again, opposites. I have a Russian model and an African-American model. And again, the buyer-seller kind of thing.
yeah. Beautiful work, Andrew.
Thank you. And then another inspiration for some of my paintings is the Judgement of Paris, which is a Greek story from ancient Greek myth about the three main Greek goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. And at one point in the story goes that they got into an argument with each other who's the most beautiful of the three main goddesses. So they tried to ask the other gods, and the other gods don't want to get involved in the argument because they don't want to deal with the Greeks, right? So let's go down to earth and ask a mortal. They'll give us an honest answer, and we'll disguise ourselves as mortals. And what they do is they find this guy named Paris. He's a Trojan prince. And they land down on earth, and they go to him, and you judge which one of the three of us is the most beautiful. And they all offer him bribes. They offer him different things, like Athena offers him wisdom or victory in war. Hera offers him, I think, a happy marriage and made lots of kids. And Aphrodite offers him the most beautiful woman in the world, which is Helen of Troy. So of course he picks her, and that's what starts the Trojan War. So it's all his fault. Anyway, what you see is detail from a Raphael painting, which I don't know if this painting was ever completed, but the study was done. So you see this guy over on the left, you see his three female figures. And I also was looking at this painting, these Dutch paintings of amorous couples. This is one by Sorg. He's kind of a not that famous Dutch painter, but pretty good painter here.
Yeah.
And so I kind of combine those things in this painting here. So this is an oyster bar. And so I have this guy here. It's that same French model. And the woman in red is the same woman from the Fulton Street painting. This is done 6 years later. Yeah. So you have the guy squeezing the lemon onto the oysters, kind of a sexual symbol there. And then you have a girl playing the guitar and another waitress reaching under, trying to grab a bottle of wine from under the counter. And so the idea is you have this single male figure and you have the kind of three male figures.
The three women. Oh, that's fascinating.
So here's another one. This is a Venetian kind of ball scene where after the ball, everyone's taking off their masks. And, as I mentioned, I've been to Venice. My wife and I like Venice. We've been there several times, and it's always nice to see the carnival things. And so we bought a few masks in Venice and so on. And it's just really interesting. The Venetian painting is so amazing, and so I've done that theme, and it's something I'm pursuing still to this day. There's another one here. This is from 2004. So it's a black and white kind of thing where I try to really restrict the palette here. And again, in this case, you have five figures. You have the three women, the male, but you have another male cut off to the side. So again, with the five figures, each represents one of the five senses. So that's also built into the painting as well.
And the playing cards, any reference for that?
Yeah, actually it is. In terms of the cards, what's going on here is that it's actually an allusion to the September 11 attacks, if you can believe that. I actually took the numbers from the airplane and put it on one of the cards, because this was done in 2004, and there were a lot of painters who are trying to address this issue through their art. And I felt that most of the time it was done, I thought, really not well. It was done in a way
clumsily, in a way
very distressing, very disturbing, and I wanted to kind of allude to it in a little bit more of a subtle way. So the two female figures are kind of like the towers in a way, and then the two men with the mask are sort of like the airplanes, if you can think of it that way. That kind of, but you don't have to know that to really
appreciate the painting. The painting,
my own personal, because it's something I want to deal with. I haven't lived in New York for a long time. So then I started to go for my master's degree a little bit later while I was teaching, and I decided for my thesis to take on the theme of motion capture and kind of computers in general, because I saw, obviously the encroaching technology. My way of working is very traditional. I work with, paint, brushes, canvas, daylight models. It's very low tech. You could have done this in the 16th century or the 15th century, like even the 10th century probably. But technology has a way of kind of getting into everything. And I also met people that worked in the motion capture industry, which is an industry where they take actors and athletes and people like that, and they put them in suits, and then they run around and capture their motion with infrared cameras, and they put that into a computer and animate them, that kind of thing. And there's a place here in Chicago that does that. And so I decided to kind of take on that as kind of my theme for my master's degree. I did a series of paintings on this. So this is kind of an early version where I have a model here and an artist, and the artist is not drawing her or painting her. She's using her digital camera and taking a picture of her. So I did. Now, of course, this painting was done with actual models and there was no technology used, but it was sort of my joke about.
Yeah, and she's sitting on it. What, an old PC is that there?
Yeah. Well, it's an old Mac. It's an old Mac. And then this kind of thing too, where the girl is, looking at the computer. And I like these old Macs. I have a couple of them, and they're just fun to paint, and they're just interesting.
Yeah.
But of course, what's going on here is there's an image on the wall. There's a poster, and we got this in Berlin, and it has an absinthe, thing, and this cat is drinking absinthe, and it's very addictive, highly addictive product there. So, and there's a detail. There's a quote from Steve Jobs, that was really funny. He's like, this computer is 12 pounds. It has a handle on it, and he put the handle on there. So if you can throw it out the window, it's going so well. According to Steve Jobs.
That's great.
So, and here's another one of these. This is kind of along the theme of my my thesis here. So this motion capture, I have the people looking at the computer, kind of taking a break, between the sessions, because there's a lot of downtime and these kind of things. There's a lot of, messing with the computers and so on. So the girl is pointing at the kind of illusionistic floor that you see in these things. It's really fascinating to see how they do this motion capture. But they put these markers on their body.
And that's what tracks them and allows them to do
that.
The
cameras film just the markers, and so then they add a skeleton and they put the figure. And these artists are amazing what they do. They're just incredible. Yeah, it's extremely difficult work though, very tedious work.
Wow.
There's another one here. So again, they're kind of taking a break here and just kind of talking or whatever. And the guy in the background working on the computer. Now they don't use Mac computers. They use these just boxes, but
yeah. But you used artistic license and
artistic license. Documentary.
Yeah.
All right. So, and there's about 10 of these large paintings. They're all fairly large, but I'm going to move on to some of these kind of inside outside sketches. So kind of things that I do just, with a little bit of downtime, interiors and landscape paintings. Sometimes we'll travel and paint, that kind of thing. This is done at a friend's house in Michigan. So that's my wife lying on the couch there.
Nice to meet her. Yes.
She's also a painter. And this is the same house. This is the bathtub there.
Yeah.
So
love the light.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, those windows are great.
Yeah.
And this is our old apartment. I've done a few paintings of this scene. It's a long corridor that opens up to the living room there.
Wow.
And then in Italy, we did some teaching in Italy and Todi, which is north of Umbria, and did some painting around the town of Todi, the city. It's a city. That's my wife painting. You can see her at the top.
Oh, she's the one painting at the top.
Yeah. And then the man this is called Casa di Ernesto, because the man who lives in that house with the arched door, he saw us painting and he comes down and he's like, wait, I got to do something. So he goes up to the top of the roof and he opens up the umbrella, because the umbrella was
perfect.
He opens up the umbrella and it looks so much better. So I named it.
Nice. I love that.
For him to do that. Yeah, it adds something to the painting.
Yeah.
This is the same town. This is San Fortunato. It's a big church in the middle of Todi, and that's a friend of ours who ran the art school that we taught at. So that's her painting.
Oh, okay.
And it was a lot of fun. The kids would roll down the grass there. They would, and they would slide and roll down the grass. Yeah, it was awesome.
That's the perfect spot for it. I could see that. Yeah.
They're like, yeah, you got to just push with your hands.
Yeah.
This is on Harvard, Michigan. So this is just not too far out of Chicago.
Oh.
So this is a kind of setup where I'm painting.
Yeah.
That's the actual painting there.
Oh, that's beautiful. I've never been there. The coastline is
This is similar all around the Great Lakes. Yeah, it's beautiful. Kind of, you get sand. It's not as big of a beach as, let's say, the Pacific Ocean, but it's quite nice. And this is oil on paper. So my wife would buy certain kinds of heavy stock paper and then put a little bit of wash with rabbit glue and a little bit of tint on there, and then you can paint directly on that. You don't need to put like an oil priming or anything or gesso.
Okay.
Just isolate the paper that way.
Oh,
A
wonderful.
series of demonstrations and articles for Artist magazine, which is a magazine here in the States, and did that
Mhm.
for 3 years, a bunch of articles. And so this kind of shows the kind of typical thing I'll do. And here you can see that panel again. This is a panel with a tone on there with again rabbit glue and a little bit of pigment. And
Oh,
then again, I'm building the painting up here, and it's too small to read it. But basically, I'm kind of building up the painting using oil medium and kind of just showing how I do this. This is something I would cover in my mentorship, of course.
mhm.
That's the cover there. You can see the painting there.
Yeah. Oh, the mirror illusion. Oh, your work is spectacular, Andrew. I'm looking at that. Yeah.
All right, so process, a few things about that. This is a painting I did recently of a barista. It's a series that I'm starting with baristas. And so here you can see I'm just with a pencil and paper, just sketching out different poses. And I couldn't really come up with anything until she took like a break and she's like put her hand that's one. And then she started
There you go.
painting her, and that's this kind of painting coming along there with all this kind of Italian exotic, barista equipment.
Yeah.
That's the painting there.
Oh, this one is beautiful.
Thank you.
Now, can I ask you how long did it take from start to finish for a painting like this? And what size is this? Well, we
This
saw it.
painting, it's about life size. The figure is about life size, so it's about 40 by 30, something like that, maybe a little bit bigger. And
Mhm.
it took, well, she would pose for 3 hour sessions, and we probably did 4 or 5 sessions, I think. I don't remember
Mhm.
exactly. And then the rest of the objects were done, when she wasn't there. And that took
Okay.
another, I don't know, 15 hours, 20 hours, maybe. I mean, it's spread out over time. So because
Yeah.
of the thing. So it took, it took a couple of months, several months, I think, to get it done.
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful.
And then this is a recent self-portrait.
Very nice. Yeah.
All right, so I want to move on to talking about color. Unless anyone has any questions, I'm just going to jump in and do that.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? Dusty, Joanne, anybody have anything you want to ask Andrew at this point?
Not at the moment.
Okay, all right, let's keep going because I'm mindful of the time here. So this is just a show of my typical kind of palette that I use for painting, mostly for figures and other things. So black, white, raw umber, transparent earth yellow, which is like a raw umber. It's like a dark mustard color. Spanish earth or caput mortuum, which is like a deep kind of dry blood color, I guess you could say. Venetian red, which is a brick red, and then I have alizarin crimson, it's a wine red, naphtha red, which is like the same as cadmium red, cherry red. I have an azo brown or brown ochre, which is like a kind of olive green color. There's different companies that make different names, and it all looks the same. It looks like olive green. Some kind of blue, like usually an ultramarine or a cobalt, and then sap green, or there's other greens I have as well. What I'm not showing here would be Naples yellow, which I sometimes would use as well. But that's kind of the basic palette. And then there's a lot of other colors I use for specific things. But for the figure, though, that vertical column is the main one with a couple of those other bright colors.
Okay.
And then here's a series of square. I'm just going to go through this quickly. These are square still life paintings that I did where there's a one color dominant theme. So this is the square still life blue. So mainly the objects are blue with a little bit of complementary colors. And I'll get into that in just a second. Here's the green one. There's the yellow one. And of course, I have computers and things in them as well.
I love what you put in.
Orange one. There's the red one.
Oh, wow.
Skateboard in there. There's the purple one.
Pomegranate juice or wine?
Yeah, it's that palm bottle. Yeah, it's a
Okay.
pomegranate juice. All right, so when we talk about defining a color, it gets tricky when we talk about color because there's something called qualia, which is the idea that what you see in color might not be what another person sees. So you hope that you're seeing the same thing. We don't really know, but we assume that we are. So you're limited in your ability to describe color. Everyone has their own favorite colors, and colors have unconscious responses. So talking about color is always a little bit tricky. In terms of like the basic colors, if we look at Aristotle, he had sort of 7 basic colors that he looked at, and those are based on the planets that they knew back then. It gets kind of complicated, but Isaac Newton is the first person to really kind of codify color as a science. His famous experiment with a piece of glass and getting the rainbow. He also listed 7 basic colors. It turns out he actually had his assistant help him name some of the colors because I guess the assistant was younger or had better eyesight for color. He was pretty young when he did this, so he just trusted this guy. So they came up with 7 basic colors, and he created a circle, which is based on the musical octave, basically.
Oh,
Now, it's a bit of a problem because 7 colors in a wheel is actually not very usable for artists. So
Mhm.
Goethe comes along, this German philosopher. He's like, forget, he read Newton's book called Optics, which is all the scientific treatise on color. It's actually very good, but Goethe hated it because he was a poet and a playwright. He thought that artists should be the ones that, as the arbiters of color, not scientists. Anyway, he comes up with his own color wheel, which is the one that's really useful. He kicks out indigo, which is the 7th color, and he comes up with a simple 6-hue color wheel, which is yellow, orange, red, violet, blue, green.
Mhm.
And there's a lot more we can say about it, but in the interest of time, we'll just move on. What's interesting about his wheel is that every color has a kind of frenemy or an opposite, right? So that opposite is what we call a complement, and that becomes extremely useful for painters going forward. Now, defining a complement is not easy. It looks easy. You look at Goethe's color wheel, but unfortunately, it's not that simple. There are several tests you can do to test a complement. So the first thing you can do is do what's called successive contrast. So you can stare at a color, or you can stare at this white dot in the middle of this red circle. And if I move to the next slide, you keep staring at that dot, you're going to see a ghost image from the red. And that color would be the opposite. That's what your eye tells you is the opposite color. So I don't know if you saw any color there, but let's do another one quickly. This is 4 colors. So kind of you stare at that dot, you're going to see ghost images, and those will be the opposite colors. All right, so here goes. So you should see some.
Oh, interesting. Yes, I can see.
That's a really good test to see what complements are, and that's slightly different from what you get in Goethe. And then there's a few other tests that I'm going to show you just a second. Now, what gets interesting is how you connect value and color, and that's what I want to show you with this demo right now. So I'm going to move out of this, and I'm going to switch over to my, oops, not that, sorry. I'm going to switch my camera here. And there we go. Let's try this. Okay, there we go. All right, so another test you can do is to do what some scientists did at the time, and possibly Newton did, was that they would create a disk. And what they would do is they would spin colors together very fast to see if they could get a gray, because if the colors cancel each other out, you get gray. That's the test, right? If the colors are truly opposite, they will produce no color when they're spun quickly. And so if I take a little motor and a battery, I can spin these colors together and see what I get. And unfortunately, over the video, this might not be very easy to see because the video can't keep up with usually the spin of this thing, but let's try it.
Well, let's see. This is fascinating, Andrew.
Okay, here goes.
Okay.
Okay, come on. Oh. Okay, I tested it before. Why isn't it going? Hold on, like the connection is not that great. I'll try it again. I get it to work here. Hold on 1 second. Come on. Oh, why aren't you working? Okay, it seems like I've got a rough. There it is. Wait. Oh my gosh. There we go.
Oh, there we go. Look at that.
Wait, right? In my set, it doesn't have that vibrating thing from my view. But
Yeah.
anyway.
But I could see that if it were real life, you would come
It
across
does.
with the yellow, the yellow and the purple.
Exactly. Let's
Yeah.
do one more here.
Oh,
And
yeah.
this is red, and this is red and green, or kind of a green. Let's try this one, see if this works. Here.
Oh, yeah.
Good. So this is another test. You can do the thing with your eyes, look at a color, stare at it, look at the ghost image, or you can spin colors. Now the thing is, they give you different results than if you actually paint the colors. You could try something like this where you can take primaries and spin them, but usually it's not very, it doesn't usually work very well. Some people think Newton may have done this to test colors. Well, just for fun, let's just see if I can get it to go here. I don't think we're going to get gray or white, but let's see what happens here. Let's see if I kind of get it something, but it's kind of brown
Yeah, it's not the same gray that the other ones were.
It doesn't really work. So that's why people aren't really sure if Newton would have done that. But other people studying color theory definitely did that. All right, so let me just move this back a little bit here so get a little bit better light. So what I have here is a series of just coins that I just traced. And what I want to do is bring up my, got about 10 minutes. Let's just bring my palette up here. And get all this stuff in here.
And you paint primarily with oils, is that correct?
Yeah, I use oil. Yeah, almost always. Yeah, almost always. Yeah. You know, I've done acrylic painting, I've done wash painting, and I teach, you know, wash painting, and of course I've done acrylic painting, murals, that kind of thing. My wife and I have done murals in restaurants and people's homes, that sort of thing. That's usually acrylic paint. But for easel painting, yeah, pretty much oil for the most part. Yeah. All right, so if you have, I'm just going to use yellow as an example here. You can mix the colors physically, unlike the way we spun the disc, we can actually physically mix the colors and see if we get a gray at 50-50. In other words, even amounts of opposites should give us a gray color, and that's how you know you've got a complement. And once you've got that complement, you can then use it to help shade objects. So I'm taking some yellow and some violet paint, and it's kind of brownish, which means I think we need a little bit of blue. And this is why Goethe's color wheel, which has yellow and violet, may not be 100% correct. And of course, if you spin the colors together, as I showed you here earlier, that's kind of a blue violet and a yellow. It's not just a straight up violet. It seems to have a blue bias, which is something you see in most of the kind of color theory that came after Goethe. There was a big explosion of color theory in the end of the 19th century or middle of the 19th century. And this is actually what helped to spur the Impressionists, because they got their whole hands on some of these books and started to really look at them seriously. It's not completely gray, but anyway, getting towards gray. Let's keep moving it here. So it starts to lose chroma, or or color. Right, yeah. Now, here's where it becomes interesting. So I'm going to do a little bit of a quick kind of color transition from yellow to blue violet, and show you how that kind of correlates to painting a form and using the proper color. So if in this circle I put 100% yellow, and in this one, I'm going to use yellow and about 90% yellow and just about 10% of the opposite color. I'm just going to grab some of this for time's sake. So it's sort of a 90% yellow, 10% complement. And I'm going to do about 75%. And as you work your way, you can do 50 and so on. And 50 would be completely gray, right? And then the blue violet color by itself is over here. So you can see what that looks like here. That's the violet or blue violet. Now, how does that help you when you're painting something? So this is where artists use the color theory. This is where the practical kind of meets the theoretical. So when you're painting an object, you want to use some of the opposite to shade the color. So if I'm doing a yellow ball, let's say, so I'm going to paint this yellow here. Oh, I got a little bit of paint in there that I want. Get that out of there. Just use a knife just to keep everything really thick. So the light side, I put in the yellow there. And for the shadow, what I want to do is use some of that opposite color, say the 75%. You don't want to go all the way to 50% because that would be gray. You just want a shadow color of yellow. So a shadow of yellow uses a little bit of the complement. And
Okay.
let's see what we got here. It's a little too much. I'll put a little bit of red in there, so it's a little too green. And so the Impressionists, and especially the post-Impressionists, people like Seurat, Gauguin, Van Gogh, these people were fascinated with color theory and the books that they were reading by these scientists. And they started to say, yeah, you know, that's how the vision, that's how the eye actually works. We're seeing complements in the shadows. Up until the time of Impressionism, people looked at the shadows, but they didn't have a system. They didn't systematically shade things. They just kind of looked at it and said, oh, it gets darker, it gets kind of browner or whatever. They had an intuitive sense, right?
Yeah, but not that.
Not a systematic one. They didn't know that there was actually a system, that the light worked in a kind of systematic way. Now, as I mentioned, Newton's discoveries came in the 17th century, and he wrote his book around 1704 or something like that. So, you know, the information was kind of out there, but the artists, being artists, they're in the cafe, you know, smoking and talking. They're not in scientific books.
Yeah.
So, you know, it took 150 years for this knowledge to kind of finally get to the artists, and once they got it, they really went crazy. Now I'm using it.
Oh, look at that! How quickly that just happened. Oh, that's
to see.
amazing, Andrew.
And then you put
Okay.
yeah, okay, and the highlight and so on.
Yeah.
And okay.
Okay.
So that's how we do it. So using that systematic approach, it really makes sense, and it really does imitate the way things really look in real life. In other words, if you would paint a yellow ball and use the system, it's going to look like the actual shadow of the ball.
You've just made that look so easy.
Super easy. Super easy, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so in my mentorship, we'll cover the stylistic things, we'll cover the theoretical things, we'll cover the technical things and the cultural things that you need to know, and talk about the source of our inspiration, how we get our ideas into the painting, and how we innovate by bringing all these ideas together.
Well, I'm really excited for this, Andrew. I'm just absolutely thrilled to get to know you better and learn more. Anybody online here want to have any questions for Andrew? Anybody want to unmute and share your faces on the camera here and say hi to Andrew? Maybe introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what your background in art is, or if you have any questions. Hi, Dusty.
Hey, Dusty.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing all that. That's really, really wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks. Glad you liked it. Happy to do it.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions for Andrew, or are you like me still wondering how he so quickly made that yellow ball look like it had shape? I'm just
Yep.
Okay.
No, it's great. I don't actually have any questions at this point in time. Still absorbing, I think.
That's fine. That's fine. Not a problem.
And Joanne, Doug, is it Elin? Any of you have any questions or comments or things you want to know about Andrew's upcoming course?
No question. I think your color theory is quite amazing.
Oh,
Super helpful. I
mean,
even
I can't take credit for it.
that short demo, like, just, you learn it, but then you kind of forget. Yeah. And then you start shading things with brown.
Right. You can use brown if you want to. But
yeah. And so it just reinforced that for me. Thank you. That was wonderful.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure.
And Elin, did you have any feedback or questions or anything for Andrew?
Sorry, I was trying to type. I was late to the demo because I had a job commitment. But I'll be happy to review the video, and if I have questions, I'll be happy to email one of you.
Great, excellent. That's terrific.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks for joining in. Big thank you to you, Andrew, for your demonstration and sharing about your history with art, your background. I am absolutely so fascinated. I'm going to go take a look at your website, and now I have books to read about art that I didn't think I had. There's so much more to learn, and you just, you've cracked open the door just a little bit, and I'm fascinated. I have so much more to to learn from you and everything. So if anyone's interested, Andrew's group, we have a start date of May the 4th. So please feel free to ping anyone at Mastrius about joining that group. We'd love to have you there, and it's about building an artist community too. We're all learning and growing and trying new things, and I'm just really looking forward to seeing what else I can learn from Andrew, because I hope that I could at some point paint a yellow ball like Andrew's yellow ball. That
You can do it, definitely.
I can do it. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Leslie, for doing this, for hosting, and look forward to seeing you again.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night, and
Great.
we'll see everybody soon.
Great, thanks.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody. Thanks, Leslie.
Thanks.